Okay, hi everyone. My name is Yvette De Luna. I would like to know if everyone can hear me now. Okay, perfect. I see that everyone can hear me. I just wanted to make sure because this is a recorded session, and let me admit everyone here. I do not have a moderator, so you have to bear with me because there are participants in the waiting room. So from time to time, I might just go there and assist them. So again, my name is Yvette De Luna. I am an employment attorney, and I began defending small businesses against employer claims when my hair was still brown, so quite a while ago. And I am very happy to be here participating in the California Community College Association for Occupational Education conference, and I hope this breakout session is useful for you. The takeaways from this presentation are, first, understanding the realities of employees or the organizational changes that have taken place and the challenges that lie ahead. Knowing that the second takeaway would be knowing that using a relational framework for specifically relate to employees will pave the way towards meaningful and connected relationships with employees. And the third takeaway should be how to have difficult conversations. Now, healthy relationships between leaders and employees are the building blocks of collaboration and trust in an organization. We've all heard the rumor that no one wants to work anymore. If it's true, then we're in big trouble. Fortunately, that's not true. It's just that things have changed a bit, and we are going to talk about that. During my 25 years of practice, I have realized that at their core, employment claims are about two things. They are about lack of proper documents, and they are about failed relationships with employees. And these days, failed relationships with employees are also driving resignations in very large numbers, a trend that began a year ago in April of last year, and it's still going on strong. That phenomenon, as you may know, it's known as the Great Resignation. And it began in April of 2021 when 3.8 million workers voluntarily quit their jobs. And by December of last year, 38 million workers had abandoned the workplace voluntarily. And recent numbers say that it is still going on strong. In February of 2022, the voluntary quits were holding steady at, that month, they registered 4.3 million resignations. And the total of resignations by February of 2022 was 48 million people had voluntarily left the workforce. And the reasons behind the failed relationships with employees are multi-layered, and they are behind most of those resignations. And the first layer of reasons for failed relationships with employees is organizational culture. Hold on, guys, let me admit someone else here. Okay, perfect. So we were saying that the first layer of reasons for failed relationships with employees is culture. In January of 2022, an analysis made by an MIT professor, a company founder, and a company CEO that explored the reasons behind the Great Resignations was published. The authors of the analysis were Charles Saul, and Ben Swig. They collected data from more than 1 million Glassdoor reviews, and they reviewed the complaints from employees coming from the organizations that were losing the most workers, the most employees. And their conclusion was that the top 5 drivers of the Great Resignation are unrelated to money and compensation. The top driver, it turns out, is toxic culture. The article, which was published by Inc., summed it up best with a quote. It said, the headline takeaway is that most analysis of the Great Resignation are getting the most important drivers of the whole phenomenon wrong. No one likes to be underpaid, but it turns out people like disrespect and insecurity even less. Those are the words of author Jessica Stillman. Now, a second layer informing failed relationships with employees are the changes in the employment contract exchange. You might agree with me that the employment contract gives way to a very unique relationship. It is unique because the relationship is etched in need and it reflects interest, intention, and in opposition. Let's first take a look at those fundamental interest intention of the employment contract. The fundamental and eternal tensions of the employment contracts are ingrained in several facts. The first one is that the leaders and employees that coincide at work, they do coincide at work quite by accident. Other people decided whom to hire. So organizations bring together people of different ages, backgrounds, beliefs, upbringing, training, culture, ideas, and they do that randomly. Usually an employer gives little weight to the quality of the relationships that will flourish or will perish among leaders and employees. It is like a true blind date situation, but it's a permanent situation if you get hired, right? And without knowing their common values, their aspirations, their intentions and interests, their ethics, their feelings, their and methods of and their language of appreciation, organizations bring leaders and employees together rather haphazardly, and they hope and they expect the best. Leaders are tasked with leading employees that they might like or dislike personally. But leaders know or should know that using I personally like or I personally dislike as a criteria to relate and develop relationship with employees is a poor relational approach. But leaders are hardly ever taught or shown an alternative way of relating and developing relationships with employees. Employees experience a similar fate. They are led by leaders they accidentally the ones that they accidentally get at work, and they might like or dislike them personally. However, if an employee is inspired by their leader and finds purpose and appreciation through his performance, even if they personally dislike the leader, then a culture of collaboration is quite possible. By any chance, do any of you know what the percentage of employee engagement is in the US? Well, I'm going to make you suffer. A Gallup study that it's called the State of the American Manager, that has been going on for 12 years, says that employee engagement is at a mere 30%. And I checked it out, for the presentation, and again, it's still going strong. This means that when you guys get to work every day, and you're most likely greeted by disengaged employees. So you spend a good deal of your day dancing with resistance, and by the end of your day, you are probably anxious and exhausted, stressed out, and dissatisfied. And what's worse, that Gallup study that I mentioned says that 70% of the disengagement in the workforce is the manager's fault. Imagine that. Recently, a frontline supervisor asked me, whatever happened to work where a boss gave an order and it got followed without much fuss? Well, work has been changing for quite a long time, And what happened is the pandemic gave it a final push. And one of the things that changed forever is what actually gets exchanged through the employment contract. As you know, the employment contract is an exchange, and until recently, what we promised each other when getting into an employment contract was salary and or benefits exchanged for obedience and directed performance of tasks. Millennials and Gen Z changed those work vows. The exchange that makes sense to them and that will make them stay with your organization does not include neither achieving tasks through obedience or director performance of tasks. They expect salary and or benefits exchange for tasks that they can perform with autonomy, with self-responsibility and creativity. In other words, the new work vows, the new exchange that in the employment contract involves what author Leticia Vitot calls craftsmanship values. They are, this servile characteristic that the employment contract has had up until now is vanishing, and we need to adapt. To that, you must add that the way to engagement with the new generations is through purpose. Money is no longer the only bargaining chip on the table. If you can clearly articulate a purpose and a common goal, then you are on the right path. So let's continue with the, I think there's someone in the waiting room. Let me pause here and admit it. Okay, thank you. So let's continue with the eternal tensions of the employment contract. The employment contract is based on need, on organizations and employees seek out each other out of need. A company needs to fill out a position to generate production. The employee needs to work to earn a living. At face value, it seems that both parties are rowing in the same direction. But it is beneath the surface of the exchange, though, that the tension lives. On the one hand, there is the employer. Generally, the employer wants the most amount of production possible for the least number of wages and benefits. Then there is the employee. Generally, the employee wants the highest wages possible for standard or minimum amount of production. These are opposing interests any day of the week, and you add to that authority. In the employment contract, the employer and its representatives, such as leaders, managers, supervisors, they are recognized as having authority to coerce behavior from employees to meet productivity goals. And there you have it. That fabric makes the employment contract and the employer-employee relationship quite unique. How can leaders then address this one-of-a-kind relationship with the employees that they get to lead? By intentionally learning and using a framework suited for such a one-of-a-kind relationship. The employer complaint I got the most as an employment attorney was rather an emotion, one of disappointment. I have heard that disappointment expressed as, oh, and I treated her or him like a father, a brother, a mother, an uncle, a son, and a nephew, and look how she paid me. The look how he paid me or she paid me is addressing the fact that most likely than not, an employee asserted his employment rights and an employer got disappointed by that. So the employer is saying, look how he or she paid me, expected the employee to behave like a son, daughter, nephew, uncle, like a family member. So I remember this case that I got to defend an unjust dismissal. And basically the story goes something like this, an employee walks in the door, there's the owner, he starts insulting, cursing the employee and says, you're fired. He did that in front of everyone. So the employee files a lawsuit, an unjust dismissal lawsuit. And when I was trying to understand what happened, the owner had taken, he saw this particular employee as a son. So he would lend the employee his car so that the employee could pick up his children because the employee was going through a divorce and some personal problems or things he needed to work out with his then wife. And so the owner stepped in and he was in solidarity with the employee, and he would do all this. So when he was telling me what was behind his insulting this employee and firing him in front of everyone. It was that emotion, that frustration, that anger and that sadness of that disappointment. The funny thing is that he had good cause to fire the employee, see? Because the employee was on call during the weekend and an emergency call came through and he failed to take care of it because he was at his mother's birthday party. And he decided, that he wasn't going to take that call. So he had good cause. He complicated the entire thing. We ended up negotiating a minimal amount, a nominal amount for the claim because he took away the employee's dignity in front of everyone else. And this was in a jurisdiction that mattered, that costs money. So when employees and employers are free of that family type of bond and they can stick to work, from a legal stand, that's a win-win situation, because I really love internal complaints because it gives an organization a chance to correct course before the entire thing becomes a legal claim. Plus, it is a golden opportunity to save the relationship between leaders and employees. When a supervisor creates family bonds at work, he creates behavior expectations that are beyond the scope of employment. We start expecting something else. An employer treating employees like family expects loyalty beyond the realm of work. They expect self-effacing loyalty from the employee. They expect little or no demands from the employees. They expect accommodations from the employee that only deepen legal liability and trashes the relationship. So on the other hand, when employees self-efface, what do they expect? They expect employers to pay up with big and small overlooks and favors that look a lot like special treatment. Like that employee, he thought he was so tight with the owner. He thought it was a good idea. He was going to get away with not taking care of an emergency that, it was one of the biggest clients of the company having the emergency. So he thought he could, just not do that because he was tight with the owner and it would be overlooked because it was his mother's birthday. So that's self-effacing for the good of the company, but which is detrimental to the employee. It runs counter to the nature of the employment contract. Ask yourself the following: why does it bother you so much that employees assert their employment rights or complain about the way things are done internally? It is usually because a leader is someone else's, sorry, let me admit someone else. Okay. It is usually because the leader is emotionally invested in the outcome. When one is emotionally invested in the outcome, it is a symptom of having used your personal interpersonal skills at work and not work interpersonal skills. Another factor that is playing a part in failed relationships with employees is what I call the generational pool. Slowly but surely, my generation and Gen X are a numerical minority in the workforce. And us boomers will soon be a memory. And Gen X will be outnumbered by the next generations, millennials and Gen Z. This is important, again, because as we were talking, millennials and Gen Z have a different definition of work. To leverage the craftsmanship values of creativity, autonomy, and self-responsibility, which they expect in that exchange. They don't expect you to direct them how to, they expect to be trained, but they don't expect you to, after training, direct every single thing they do. They expect you to allow them room for their creativity, autonomy, and self-responsibility to help them finish and complete tasks. So to leverage those craftsmanship values, we need to know more than ever how to connect with our employees. So how do we do that? Let me let someone else in here. I'm sorry, guys, I don't have a moderator, so I am moderating as well as speaking. So let me get a drop of water. So then how do we do that? How do we connect with our employees? Well, before going into that, tell me something. How many of you have felt deep disappointment because what you got from an employee was, what you perceive as ungratefulness in return for you going out of your way to accommodate? We've all been there, right? When we go out of our way to accommodate, we do it to make everything better for others, and to make it possible for them to remain as part of the team. So how is it that we end up in what seems like a poorly written soap opera? Well, the good news is that there is a way of building strong, proper bonds. The bad news is that the work to be done does not involve the usual suspects. It involves us. It involves us as leaders, and we are the ones that are going to drive that. We are going to be the agents of change. And when we learn at work to manage employees, we mostly show up with the relational skills that we use with family and friends. So the tendency is to relate to employees as we relate to our family or friends. We hardly truly make a distinction. We keep a certain distance because, it's work after all, but that is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about intentionally using a set of skills specific to the workplace, using our personal interpersonal skills in the workplace. Interpersonal skills we usually have. Even when taught of effective communication or management skills, we're not taught the distinction. It is also natural to connect with that team member that reminds us of that mother, that brother, that uncle, that friend. After all, we human beings crave connection above all else, and a familiar face or a familiar personality makes the connection easier. But wanting harmony at work is one thing, and creating family intimacy with an employee ignores the reality of the employment relationship and benefits no one really. The interaction we have with family, friends differs from the way we should relate to employees. As we have seen, this is why we get so deeply disappointed when going out of our way to accommodate and then get in return what we perceive as ungratefulness. When people say we're just like family, that's code for an organization in trouble with its relationship with employees. Even if at the time they say it, they're not having any problems, they're headed that way. Regardless of how close we feel to the employees we lead, manage, and supervise, they are far from being our family. They are partners in collaboration, in performing tasks, in achieving a common work goal. And we grow fond of them and we appreciate them. The problem is we equate that work affinity with the one we have with family and friends because it sort of feels similar. When we intentionally distinguish between personal, interpersonal, and work interpersonal, we're off to a good start, though. Doing so allows space for the fundamental and eternal tensions of the employment contract that we already talked about. When I started managing employees directly, although I knew my lawyer stuff, I really did not know how to approach the employees. I did not know how to relate to them. Was I supposed to sort of befriend them? Was I supposed to parent them, mentor them? Was I supposed to boss them around, or a combination of all those things? And I tried them all, and none of it worked quite the way I was expecting. My training in positive discipline was what helped me understand one thing, and you might want to take this down. It was important to be kind at all times. And to be kind, I just needed to be kind. I did not have to befriend anyone. To get things done, I did not need to be bossy. I just needed to be firm, but respectful. And to listen and validate feelings and beings, I did not need to get my personal beliefs all embroiled at work. I just needed to remain mindfully detached to procure as much as I could, agreed upon solutions rather than imposing a solution based on what I believe. Although there are calls that a leader needs to make, I'm not talking about those times. I'm talking about more on the day-to-day operation. And that is how the R.E.D relational framework for managers got boots. As a boomer, I was taught that by my father, that work is honor and hard work gets you places. But when I joined the workforce, I was in for a rude awakening, because work was everything that my father said, but it was also where I was a woman in a male-dominated profession. And because of it, I had to prove time and again that my gender did not make me less fit for work, that my gender did not make me unreasonably emotional, that I could tend to my children and also do my job. So I learned that sometimes hard work alone is not enough. Leaders that believe in and see whole human beings are much needed. Human skills are trending in a major way. That is how leaders will make meaningful connections with employees. So how do we shift to a new way of relating to employees? Well, we start by becoming aware of our conditioned responses, as well as our implicit biases and our non-negotiables. By knowing all this about ourselves, we become aware of the benefits we need we become aware of the beliefs we need to set aside to facilitate a genuine human connection with the employees of all sorts of backgrounds. Becoming aware of one's clusters of thoughts and feelings that surface rather automatically also helps. For example, and you might want to write it down, you have to be on the lookout for the autocrat self-reactions, the self-pitier self-reactions, the detective self-reactions, and the distance self-reactions. These thoughts and feelings that we are going to talk about now happen quite automatically while interacting with another person. You can dish them out, or you can see someone experiencing them. But if we become mindful of these, you have a better chance of refraining from acting out on these clusters of feelings and thoughts. So let's dive in. How many times have you caught yourself saying or thinking, I am the boss. You will do as I say because I say so. I pay your salary, you will do as I say. I feel disrespected and powerless. I have lost control over this situation. I am threatened and fear this person. I think at some point, if you manage employees, we all have, and we've all thought about it, might have even said some of those. When that happens, it means that the autocrat in all of us is knocking at the door and wants to take over the interaction with the employee. Beware. The autocrat self in all of us is connected to self-doubt and fear. These thoughts set us up to act on them, and acting on them in our minds restores control and balance because we are feeling disrespected. And if you yield to those feelings and to those thoughts, you will give power to the emotions of the autocrat self. And you will let the self-doubt and fear take over your interaction with an employee. You will also, by the way, will push out collaboration, and you will damage the relationship. Become mindful of the cluster of thoughts and feelings of the autocrat self, and just stop and don't let them take over. The second one is the second cluster of feelings and thoughts is the self-pitier in all of us. The self-pitier self in all of us is connected to our human need to be worthy through helping others. You will know it wants to take over when you catch yourself thinking or feeling, or if you hear someone saying things like, you're not doing enough for me right now. Or I feel guilty because I should have helped more. I want my recognition for what I do for others. I feel sad and unappreciated because they do not recognize my efforts. I am angry because I helped and still they are not satisfied. If you react by displaying helplessness or by reacting with pity, you will give power to the emotions of the self-pitier. You will also push genuine collaboration out of sight. So become aware of this cluster of feelings and thoughts. Then there's the third one, the detective selves. You will know that one is trying to take over if you catch yourself thinking, or if you hear someone saying things like, making a lot of questions to make, it seems like to make the person doubt herself and prove that the person is right. Or if you hear someone say, I am upset because I want to be right, to, I know I am right. Or if you feel, I feel the need to save face to avoid feeling inadequate, or I feel inadequate in the presence of this particular person, or I have doubts about myself when I am with this person. Those thoughts and feelings are setting you up to, and to feel valued, which is what the detective self is seeking to soothe. If you yield, then again, you push out collaboration, and you will definitely damage, slowly, but surely you will damage the relationship. And finally, the distant self in all of us is connected to our human need to have contact with others and self-confidence. You will know that it is about to take over your interaction if you catch yourself thinking, or if you hear someone saying things like, I am distant, vague, and distracted, so you should work on drawing me out. I feel disrespected when this person keeps her distance and does not engage with me. Or something like, I am annoyed because I need to talk with him or her to solve problems and decide, but she's distant. If you yield by displaying withdrawn behavior or by reacting to withdrawn behavior, you will give power to the emotions of the distant self. And you will, again, push genuine collaboration out of sight. So it's best to stay away from the distant self, to pause and engage in a healthier way. So then how do I get anything done if I'm not to react or have any responses to those thoughts and feelings? Well, by using a specific relational framework such as R.E.D, which is respect, empathy, and mindful detachment. If you use those in tandem, then you have a relational framework to come back to every single time. A brief note before we go into the skills of R.E.D. If you feel that using the skills that we're going to talk about, make you lose your edge, or it's going to make you soft, please understand that to be assertive and to lead, you do not need the my way or the highway stances. In fact, the newer generations fully reject this stance. What you need to get the job done is to speak the same language as your employees do. You can yell like a boss's boss, be rude, curt, blunt, terse all day long. Understand that is not the language that will get things done with the new generations, which are now the majority of the workforce. And it will not get long-term commitment from your employees either. It will affect employee engagement, your culture, and your turnover rates. By insisting on my way or the highway styles, you trash the possibility of bonding with employees in a common purpose. Try to remember, when was the last time that you felt embarrassed or humiliated by a person with authority over your work? Did you feel motivated and passionate about doing better after that? Or how did you feel? Jane Nelson asks, where did we ever get the crazy idea that to make someone do better, first, we need to make them feel worse? Having said that, let's start the review of the emotional skills that will have you leading under the R.E.D framework. Let's dive in. Giving advice on personal matters, scolding as if employees were children, ranting and shouting and forcing employees to witness your rant or emotional dysregulation and similar behaviors are all intimacy-based behaviors. These behaviors might have a place in familiar or filial intimacy-based relationships. However, employees never consented to this type of intimacy when they accepted your job offer. Insisting that they witness such behavior is an imposition. Impositions on our employees are possible because you are the boss. Hence, imposing an intimacy that employees never meant to have with you nor ever consented to, is a genuine abuse of power. And this fosters toxic work environments. Often, I have witnessed how employers jump into an employee's sphere of intimacy without even realizing it. I have seen how managers react after an employee has entrusted them with a personal situation. Without asking, they send presents or flowers or some some gift to distract the employee from his personal or family situation, hoping to make them feel better. But this looks a lot like what a friend would do. However, treating an employee the way we would friends or family in distress is an improper exercise of our authority. A manager that is entrusted an employee's personal situation only knows about it because the situation usually affects the employee's work. A manager that then takes it upon himself to be nice. This is the important part. Without first specifically asking about gestures, not at the time, but before without knowing about that person, his reaction to gesture, has jumped into the employee's sphere of intimacy by way of work power dynamics. That is totally unacceptable. Instead, we use a relational framework to relate to employees. And today I will talk to you about R.E.D, which uses the emotional skills of respect, empathy, and mindful detachment in tandem. The respect in R.E.D is given in a triple dose. Let's start there. How do we reach triple dose respect? Well, you might want to write this down. You do it by minding the tone of your voice, your body language, and your words and actions. The first dose of respect is given through a firm, confident, deep tone, through your tone of voice. You avoid nervous and abrupt or sullen tones of voice. The second dose of respect is given through your body language. Your body language reflects your true state of mind. Sometimes, it sort of reveals that it will tell on us. Therefore, you must remain mindful of tapping with hands, leaning front or back, crossing your arms, moving your legs nervously, twitching of any kind, repeatedly blinking your eyes, scratching your head. If you're aware of your body movements, you will avoid saying with your body what your words are not saying. And the third dose of respect is given through your words. Words do matter. Choose them carefully. Avoid words you would use with family members. When you master the combination of these three communication channels, you will have respect in a triple dose. When triple respect is present, then intimacy in a familiar way is not possible. So aim at interacting with an excess of respect rather than with an excess of familiarity and intimacy. Now, the E in red stands for, let me see if there's anyone here. Okay. The E in red stands for empathy. Empathy is fast becoming a leadership job requirement. The good news is that empathy is teachable. Empathy sometimes gets confused with compassion, and they are not the same. Compassion is when you look upon another from your vantage point of view and feel bad for them. At some point, compassion will have you might have you feeling even, feeling lucky because you are not going through what the unfortunate person is going through. Compassion will have you feeling the way you would feel if the thing were happening to you. Empathy, on the other hand, is placing yourself fully in the shoes of the other person. You do that without assuming that how you feel about it is how the other person feels about it. To get to empathy, you must ask the other person what they are experiencing and feeling. Assumptions do short circuit through empathy. I remember that during the pandemic. Here, hold on. During the pandemic, there was this employee that lost her mother, and her mother was in another country, so she wasn't able she just never saw her mother again. And when I heard that, I had to process what I felt, how I felt about that, because if had I lost my mother in the pandemic without being able to really see her again, because she was vacationing, the mother was vacationing. So if my mother leaves for a vacation and I never see her again because she dies during her vacation, I would be devastated. I would have been devastated. And I felt awful for her, but that's not what was happening. They didn't have a good relationship. So although she had her emotions her private emotions to work with, she, what I would have offered was that, which was time off, and I did offer time off, and all sorts of accommodations for her to be able to manage that event. She declined because it turns out she didn't have such a great relationship with her mother. So sometimes there are things we assume that will short circuit empathy. What she was feeling was the need to work more than ever, because that's how she was distracted from not only the event with her mom, but everything else that was going around at the time with the pandemic. So there are many ways to learn empathy, but generally it requires working on the following. Number one, you identify your non-negotiables. To empathize, you must be aware of what things, beliefs, situations, prejudices, values are non-negotiable for you. When our non-negotiables are involved in something, we automatically raise barriers and usually assume a defensive posture, sometimes without even realizing it. Being aware of this helps us know ahead of time which situations require even more detachment from us, because our tendency will be to judge. Number two, be aware of your emotions. To identify emotions in others, we must first identify them in us. One way of doing it is through meditation. Another way of getting in touch with our emotions is to make conscious mood checks. Set alarms on the clock, on it ideally like 8 times a day at first, and pause and intentionally connect with your emotions. Number three, stop labeling emotions as good or bad. Emotions are just, they just happen, just like thoughts. But many of us, we've been conditioned to label emotions, and we are conditioned to react with, oh, don't cry, don't get angry, smile. To empathize, it is essential that we discard judging emotions as good or bad. While we can control how we control how we respond to our emotions, we do not arise in us or in others. They are like thoughts, as I've said. We choose what thoughts to focus. The key is to separate the judgment we make of the emotion from the experience of processing the emotion. Number four, identify the emotions others are having without judging them. One way to identify emotions in others is to interpret their facial expressions. Another way to identify emotions in others is by reading their body language. And the most effective, and the one I recommend the most at work, is to ask. We should normalize the question of what are you feeling, or how do you feel? This is fundamental in the path to empathy. Once the other person's emotion has been identified, the only thing left to do is to validate it, not judge it. And finally, imagine feeling how the other person in front of you is feeling. Imagine you are walking and you see a mother trying to control 2 small kids that will not stop moving. Pause and place yourself in her shoes. Is she feeling overwhelmed because she is tired, as the kids are still small and she is not getting a full night's sleep yet? Or on the contrary, is she having fun and turning the situation into a game? This exercise is to imagine what you would feel in each of those 2 scenarios. But you're not going to, you can't guess what she is actually feeling. You practice what it could be, but you have to ask in order to know exactly what she's processing. And while you're imagining how you would feel, pay attention to the judgments that will arise in you. Your mind will generate an opinion, a conclusion, and a judgment. So become the observer of those three things, detach from them, and simply observe them. Continue detaching as if the opinion, conclusion, and judgment belonged to someone else. You will experience either the weakening of your judgment or its disappearance. There are people who really have a hard time empathizing with the emotions of others. In those cases, one can start practicing intellectual empathy, hold a strong opinion on, and take the opposite stance. Say, if you don't believe in abortion, take the opposite stance and advocate for more lax abortion laws. Or if, on the other hand, you do believe in abortion, take a position that advocates for stricter abortion laws. Identify what the opposing side's best arguments are and make that argument stronger. Ask a friend to listen to these arguments to help you sound credible and convincing. Once you have solid arguments, you write about how your thought process was. Identify the things you had to set aside to make way for the counter argument. Write about what you felt. Write what, if anything, changed in you. You will be surprised with the results. Another way to develop empathy is to socialize with people that are quite different from you. Travel is a spectacular way of achieving it. However, there are other more accessible local ways of doing it. And inviting people to your table from outside your personal circle, it's the quickest and most effective way. Also, community work and working with volunteer organizations are ways to walk towards empathy. And last but not least, the D in R.E.D stands for mindful detachment. And domestic violence is a suitable example that works to illustrate mindful detachment. In an organization, once a leader is on notice of a domestic violence situation, he or she decides a course of action based on what the employee needs and based on company procedures. Now the organization leader gets to replace what they believe about domestic violence with the thoughts and actions that will safeguard everyone. Personal beliefs and thoughts about how the employee should manage the relationship with the aggressors are irrelevant. Mindful detachment coupled with triple respect allows a leader to empathize with an employee. But it will keep at bay the urge to give all sorts of advice outside the scope of work. It will keep the I am talking to you as a friend, not a supervisor bit far away from this very important conversation. What can you do for an employee that entrusts you with a traumatic or challenging personal situation? Well, only what the work-related options allow you to do. You mindfully detach to accommodate and follow company policies. You detach to plan things such as changing schedules or providing similar or more complex accommodations while the employee resolves the challenging personal situation. You do it without asking yourself, is it fair or not to provide this work accommodation? You detach from what you believe is fair or unfair. You stay away from comparing what you would do if you were in the employee's shoes. You detach from your internal chatter to deliver the best likely outcome for all stakeholders with everyone's dignity intact. You focus on what you can do for the employee. For example, regardless of how you feel about it, you can be flexible with the terms of conditions of employment. If the employee is losing concentration, then lowering production expectations for a time is an option. But going beyond work-related solutions to help the employees fix their problem is stepping outside the bounds of the work social contract. Detachment at work can be confusing because it appears as uncaring, and it is not. However, managing with mindful detachment will allow you to substitute what you believe with what benefits all stakeholders. Now, the last takeaway of this presentation, as we're almost out of time, is difficult conversations. Relational perfection is impossible, but relational competence is doable. However, even when there's a high degree of relational competence, conversations to ease tensions are required at times. And having conversations to ease tensions without rhythm or rhyme can create awkward or unnecessary uncomfortable conversations. Difficult or candid conversations, as opposed to strategy meetings, are one-on-one interactions to address thorny issues. The issues range from performance matters to organization policy violations to personal hygiene. I mean, the range is long. Although there is no one-size-fits-all approach for managing, for having difficult conversations, leaders still need ways to have them within a standardized framework. Leaders who have not trained on the subject have a hard time having these conversations. They either make up the rules as they go along, or they rely on personal interactions to have them. Meanwhile, others avoid difficult conversations altogether. The price paid is that thorny matters go unaddressed, they accumulate, and they cause frustration, or they get addressed cursorily. One thing is for sure, employees can't be ordered to change who they are. That is why conversations are had to reach agreements and develop action plans. These conversations follow a method. To have a difficult conversation, connection with the employee, I call them collaborators, is established first. To begin a difficult or candid conversation, the leader serves respect, empathy, and mindful detachment at all times during the conversation. This is a crucial distinction from the so-called sandwich method of having a difficult conversation, where connection with the collaborator is not, with the employee, is not sought. The sandwich method calls for the interaction with the employee to follow a pattern of praise, pause, have the uncomfortable conversation, and then praise at the end of the conversation. Connection is the hardest part of having a difficult conversation, but a conversation about candid or difficult subjects cannot proceed, it cannot be had without it. Connection is sought by asking questions and exploring the collaborators, the employees' thoughts, mood, and feelings. Questions are crucial at this stage. Genuine interest in the responses is also important, because once the leader establishes a meaningful human connection with their collaborator, with the employee, then the conversation can proceed. Additionally, a candid conversation always has these nine components. It has active listening, because we have to shy away from listening to the version of events of an employee and immediately start making conclusions and judgments and preparing an answer. That's not active listening, and this process requires it. During the active listening phase, leaders are also set aside organizational goals and interests. It is important also at this stage to summarize what the employee has said and ask them if what you are summarizing is correct and is what they're saying, because that's going to be the basis of the agreements or solutions that you work on. So if an employee gets agitated at this stage, then there are two choices and courses of action. You can, postpone the conversation for another time. But if you feel that you are able to not react to the agitation and just process it with the employee, then you can continue. Foul language, it all depends if that is something that you are comfortable with or not. And if you're not, then that's a boundary that needs to be established early on. And violence, of course, is verbal or otherwise. It requires that in the process, because it is never acceptable. So in the active listening stage, we just listen and understand what the employee is saying. Number two, always hold the meeting with a witness. We do not hold difficult conversations without including a need-to-know basis witness in that meeting. Besides protecting the organization, it grounds the participants because there is a witness. And the witness can be the employee's direct or indirect supervisor. Note that peers are never, ever, ever witnesses in difficult conversations. Three, you use kind and firm in the conversations. Kind and firm is the tone for the difficult conversations with employees. The goal of the difficult conversation is to resolve something that is interrupting the flow of work. Therefore, to remain firm is very important. But remaining firm does not mean being inflexible. It means we will not lose sight of what needs resolution. There are varied ways of solving situations, and difficult conversations will lead, to one of those. And we point out it will lead to one of those by agreement. Number 4, always use first person voice. We have difficult conversations in the first person. Things like I understand, I was informed, I saw, I want to understand. First person voice helps open the meeting for the employee to express everything they have to say. In a difficult conversation, make your own perspective clear, not someone else's. Also, refrain from placing words in the employee's mouth when interacting with the employee. We conduct difficult conversations to first explore and understand their point of view. Use your triple respect skills to avoid making premature assumptions or conclusions. The tone of voice is the 5th element. The chosen tone of voice is also important. It is a component of triple respect, and even when our words are neutral, our chosen tone of voice can carry reproach, anger, frustration, sarcasm. So if you find it difficult to modulate your tone of voice, then it is better to postpone having the difficult conversation for another time. Your inability to modulate is informing you that you are in an emotional state rather than in a rational one. Postpone the conversation until you are in a rational state. The way you can carry the conversation with respect, this way you can carry the conversation with respect, empathy, and mindful detachment. Use validation, that's number 6. Another goal of having difficult conversations is to validate emotions, which is often confused with agreeing with everything the employee is saying, and it is not. Non-negotiable matters remain non-negotiable, and things that are wrong are unacceptable. Validating has nothing to do with what is non-negotiable and what is unacceptable. Validating is recognizing that the employee has a particular vantage point of view and emotions surrounding that vantage point of view, and that both of those are valid. Regardless, consequences will follow for behavior that violates company policies. If you minimize, even without ill intentions, or downplay what the employee is saying or feeling, then you are invalidating the employee's thoughts and emotions. You are doing the opposite of validating. So stop and do it over. Number 7, focus on solutions by consensus. A goal of difficult conversations is to focus on solutions by consensus rather than on finding culprits. However, if the employee brings forth an accusation, then it becomes part of the conversation. The accusation requires attention. It can reveal a lack of clarity in company values, or a lack of adequate mentoring or supervision, or possible organizational mistakes that are worth exploring. Usually, the most common contexts of difficult conversations are behaviors related to tardiness, lack of execution, interpersonal problems with other employees, misunderstandings between employees, lack of clarity in tasks, and so on and so forth. So implementing solutions by consensus sends the message that we are all in the same boat pursuing a common goal. Number 8, now that you have an agreement, the agreed to solution is written down. The stakeholders proofread the written version of the agreement. If the stakeholders agree to the written form, they sign it, and everyone abides by it. If the employee objects to the written version of the agreement, he suggests changes. If the leader agrees with the suggested changes, then the changes are made. If the manager believes the suggested changes alters the essence of the verbal agreement, then you take a step back and revisit the verbal agreement. Once clarified, then the final written version of the agreement is signed by everyone. Number 9, there are logical consequences. Logical consequences are just that. For example, if an employee handbook states that certain behaviors violate company policy, then incurring in those certain behaviors will cause a violation of company policy. The disciplinary consequences of violating company policy must hold. However, a candid conversation is also held as it yields valuable information for the organization. The information helps reach consensus agreements to, for example, avoid future company, organization policy violations. At this stage, timeframes to comply with the consensus agreement are set and they are honored. Well, and that, my friends, brings us to the end of this presentation. I hope you have found value in it, and I will leave my contact information in the chat in case you need to reach out. So let me just do that right now. And have a great Friday. Bye.